Welcome, everybody. This is a webinar entitled Herbicides Are Poisonous for Children and Other Living Things. I'm Howie Hawkins. I'm with the Green Party in Syracuse, New York, and I'll be moderating tonight. The format is we have 5 speakers, and they'll each have up to 10 minutes to present their thoughts, and we will follow that up with question and answer. And you saw the sponsors in the setup, so I'm not going to read them again. But what I'm going to do now is introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Warren Porter, who's a board member of Beyond Pesticides. And his research shows that combinations of commonly used agricultural chemicals in concentrations that mirror levels found in groundwater can significantly influence immune and endocrine systems, as well as neurological health in animals. You can see Dr. Porter discussing the potential effects of small levels of chemicals that the EPA does not test on his website. So Dr. Porter, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Howie. I'm going to bring this up full screen here. Okay, I want to talk about 3 different things tonight. I want to talk about 2 key basic ideas about why and how herbicides are poisonous for children, how all of this fits together with biology, both plant and animal, and why are there contradictions between what industry claims and what independent peer-reviewed science is saying. The first thing I'm going to ask you to get this started is, have you ever thought about why you don't dissolve when you step into the shower? And the reason for that is that there are 2 key basic principles underlying how and why pesticides work that we're going to talk about. First, oil and water don't mix and fats dissolve in fats. And secondly, opposite charges attract. When you go to make a pesticide, what you do is you create a molecule that typically has a ring-shaped structure. This is a nitrogen-carbon, and that ring there has essentially no electrostatic charge. When you have that, you've got something that we refer to as lipid-soluble or fat-soluble. The 2 words are the same. And then what you do is you hang off of that molecule 1 or more charged groups, like a nitrogen and 2 hydrogens, for example, which gives it a positive charge. So you have a molecule here that's both water soluble and fat soluble. And now you may wonder, why do you want a molecule that has both those solubilities? Well, one of the reasons is that this fat solubility allows you to dissolve the molecule, to dissolve in the cell membrane, get through the membrane because it's fat soluble. And then once it's inside, the second principle comes up: the opposite charges attract. With a positively charged molecule like this, it will be attracted to anything of opposite charge, like a mitochondrion that has lots of negative electrons flowing in it, or DNA molecule, which is also negatively charged. It can go over here and interact with either the mitochondrion or the DNA and disrupt their functions to keep them from operating properly. So what you really have is a molecular bull in a china shop with a molecule like this. And once it gets inside the cell, it can go in all kinds of directions, even interacting with ions like chloride because of the positive charge and the negative charge on that chloride ion. Now I want to talk a little bit about why everything is interconnected, especially with regard to the neurological, endocrine, immune, and developmental effects and genetic effects. We have over here a healthy system. There are molecular and cellular systems. You're using mass and energy and nutrients right now. If you had supper, I hope you have. Those are the cellular systems comprise the organ systems, like the central nervous system, the endocrine or the hormone systems, and the immune system. And all 3 of these are real close buddies. They talk to each other all the time. There are about 60 different molecules involved in that communication system. These 2, the molecular and cellular systems and the organ systems, support the individual level functions of reproduction, growth, and behavior. And at the population level, it supports birth rates, death rates, and social structure. And at the community level, it supports immigration, emigration, and relative species abundance. What the peer-reviewed literature is showing us is that pesticides, which are insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, are undermining the basic molecular cellular functions and the organ system functions. And by undermining both of those foundation supports there, you jeopardize the whole superstructure. Now there's more to it than that. There's genetic expression that's running the whole show. It's running the cellular molecular systems, and in 6 systems, unfortunately, environmental contaminants and pesticides can hack this communication code from the genetic expression and subvert the actual functions of the cellular molecular systems and the organ system function, and thereby subvert the entire superstructure on which they rest. I also want to point out that all of these structures, plants and animals, have benefit from beneficial soil microorganisms that feed them and give them nutrition. But if you have Roundup in the soil, Roundup stops amino acid synthesis in bacteria, a special kind, the aromatic amino acids, and basically it has then antibiotic effects. That means that you're killing off beneficial soil microorganisms, which are helping to provide nutrition and sustenance for plants. And also, it turns out that if you have something that have antibiotic effects, it's going to impact on the gut over here. And the gut is about 70% of your immune function. So you can be compromising your immune system directly, and by indirect means, impact on the nervous system and the endocrine system. Now, some of the known things that Roundup can do, and I should point out that Roundup is a mix of the active ingredient, in quotes, glyphosate, plus surfactants and non-ionic or fat-soluble solvents. These are in there to be able to allow the active ingredient to get through the cells, the surface of your body, and also through your lungs. And it can do then several things when it gets inside the body. One thing that's been demonstrated it'll do is damage your DNA, your genetic material, which alters your genetic expression. And if you're a fetus, that can alter your developmental patterns as a fetus. It also lowers the enzyme aromatase, which converts the male sex hormone testosterone to the female sex hormone estrogen. It's a one-way conversion. And if this normal balance that would be there without pesticides is interrupted or put out of balance, then it can change the direction of the fetal brain development, especially the sex center in the brain, and also the gonadal development, that is the reproductive organs. And it's been shown in all the major vertebrate groups and in humans that it can change sexual preferences if you alter this normal relationship for any given fetus. It also will stimulate what's called the retinoic acid pathway, which produces vitamin A. And if this is stimulated, you get too much vitamin A. And if you happen to have a pregnancy, this means more birth defects because you can get things like microcephaly or tiny heads. Another thing it can do is alter energy metabolism, like the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell that we were talking about just a minute ago. When you interrupt this normal function, you get what we call oxidative stress. And what that does is kill nerves, alters the immune function, alters hormone levels. And that's the basis for more than 10 chronic diseases. Also, it shuts down this special amino acid synthetic pathway. And when you lose your aromatic amino acids, you lose your beneficial bacteria. They die because they don't have the amino acids they need to make proteins. And if that's happening in your gut, you're talking about impacting on something that accounts for about 70% of your immune function. It's also used as a desiccant, something that dries things up, and of course as a weed killer. And it's used on white cane sugar and beet sugars. It's used on whole wheat grains. And it's behind efforts by some nutritionists to get the white out of the diet, just because if it's not organic, it's going to be contaminated. Finally, it ties up, it chelates what are referred to as divalent, 2 electrostatic charges on a metal ion, like calcium, magnesium, zinc, copper. The original patent for cleaning out boilers was what it was originally sold for as. And the significance of tying up these ions with by way of Roundup or glyphosate is that You tie up calcium and magnesium, which are critical for DNA replication. And it's also, these ions are involved in biological catalytic enzyme reactions in the body. And so they're really very vital. And if you'd like to look up some more of this, you can look it up in the Pan Glyphosate Monograph 2016. Just Google it, or Google Mordesani et al. In 2003. That's another article dealing with all of these things. Now I want to talk very briefly about why the contradictions. Why is it that we have industry saying, oh, our stuff is like a Hellfire missile. It's very, very targeted. It only affects weeds. But the reality is that globally, we're contaminating our air, our food, our water in the parts per billion. And it's very analogous to the global effects of COVID-19. It's indiscriminate in its impacts. I want to point out that there are no tests for altered sexual development, behavioral, hormonal, or neurological. And human and animal data are suggesting that we may be sexually assaulting our children in the womb, possibly altering their sexual preferences or aborting them prematurely. Our bodies function in the parts per trillion concentrations 1,000 times lower than what's considered safe. It's also important to point out that there's virtually no marketed pesticide formulation that has ever been registered by the EPA. That means that we have virtually no data on the formulations, that is the mix of the active ingredient plus the surfactants plus the organic soaps that are so important for entry into the body and the cells. Finally, thirdly, the registrations do not include tests for combined neurological, endocrine, immune, developmental, and epigenetic or DNA gene expression tests. So we have no data from collective sensitive tests at biologically relevant parts per billion or parts per trillion concentrations. And finally, data for the registrations of products come from the companies that make the chemicals, a clear conflict of interest. And so we have biased data. And that means that we have two questions that we need to address. Can we afford to continue to raise generations of children that are immunologically, neurologically, hormonally, and reproductively changed? Can we afford to induce chronic, long-term subtle diseases and alter gene expression that may be passed to subsequent generations, as has been recently demonstrated in the scientific literature? And that's all I have. I want to stop here because my time should be about up by now.
Thank you, Dr. Porter. Our next speaker is Carey Gillam. She's the research director and investigative reporter for U.S. Right to Know, and she's the author of Whitewash, The Story of a Weed Killer, Cancer and the Corruption of Science, which received the 2018 Rachel Carson Book Award. Carey.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. All right. Can everybody see my screen and hear me all right? Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you to Dr. Porter for sharing so much of the science, the important science. I am a journalist. I'm not a scientist. I've been covering this industry for about 20 years. And while the science has resonated with me from learning, from scientists like Dr. Porter and many others, what I've also found really intriguing is why, with so many peer-reviewed published articles and so much research that's been done, why more consumers don't know this and recognize the problems with a pesticide-dependent food production system, and why our regulators and our lawmakers are not more cognizant of the dangers that we face. So this is something that really sort of comes from my book, but I call it Decades of Deceit. And, when you look at the science and you see all of these problems, what you often don't see is the deceptive hand that is going on behind the scenes to convince our regulators not to act on these concerns and to dismiss and to discredit what we're hearing a lot of times from independent scientists. Let's see if I can get this to work. So just a couple things before I get into some of the deception that I've found and that many others have uncovered. Not so fun facts, I call these. We have over 1 billion pounds of pesticides used in the United States each year, approximately 5.6 billion pounds used worldwide. The USDA estimates 50 million Americans are getting their drinking water from groundwater potentially contaminated by pesticides and other agricultural chemicals. And importantly, research ties pesticides to a range of health problems, including reproductive and neurodevelopmental harm, kidney and liver diseases, and cancers. Cancer, unfortunately, has become all too common. And I'm guessing that almost everybody watching this webinar knows somebody in their family or friend group or themselves has been stricken by cancer. If 39% of the people right now in the United States expected to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetimes. 3 weeks ago, my own father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. We have more than 600,000 expected to die this year, more than 1.8 million. You can see the statistics here. This is very serious stuff, and this is affecting not only our current generations, but future generations, my children, our children's children. Speaking of children, the rate of children being diagnosed with cancer has increased 34% just since 1975. This stuff is real. And while there are many factors that play into the rise of cancer and other diseases, pesticides are a known contributing factor to this. Linda Birnbaum is somebody that I respect and regard. She's one of the world's most renowned epidemiologists. Until last year, she was the director of our National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences. And she says US regulations have not kept pace with scientific advances showing pesticides and other widely used chemicals cause serious health problems at levels previously assumed to be safe. Chuck Benbrook, another scientist with the Heartland Health Research Alliance, he puts it a little bit more directly and speaks about herbicides. The amount of herbicides used in the next 5 to 10 years is going to constitute the largest increase in US history. This is a public health train wreck that no one has the tools, the motivation, or the ability to turn around. The end game will be very costly. And I think we're already seeing a lot of that game right now. Dr. Porter talked about glyphosate and Roundup. Roundup is the focus of a lot of my work. I think because Roundup and Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer, I consider that to be the poster child really for this bigger problem of pesticide dependence that is being shoved down our throats quite literally by just a handful of very big and powerful companies. Glyphosate, the main ingredient in Roundup, was introduced to the world in 1974 by Monsanto. It is now the most widely used herbicide in the world, largely because of Monsanto's introduction of genetically engineered glyphosate-tolerant crops, Roundup-ready crops. The 1990s, for instance, before Roundup-ready crops were introduced, we had worldwide use of about 124 million pounds of glyphosate each year. Now we're closer to about 2 billion pounds of glyphosate used each year. This is a chemical that makes a lot of money. First for Monsanto and now for Bayer. And this is one of the reasons why, the science that Dr. Porter talked about and a lot of other scientists have tried to raise alarms about often gets hidden or discredited. One thing that you all probably are pretty familiar with, it's gotten a lot of attention, is what happened in 2015 when the International Agency for Research on Cancer took a look at glyphosate and analyzed it as they do, hundreds of other substances. And looked at published peer-reviewed science that had been done over many decades and determined that based upon the toxicology, the epidemiology, the mechanistic data, they found that it was a probable human carcinogen. And this is how they classified it. That, in turn, triggered litigation, an explosion of litigation in the United States from people with non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The IARC, the scientists had found a particular association with NHL. So we have people all over the United States, Roundup users suing Monsanto. And the end result is Bayer, which bought Monsanto in 2018, is now seeking to settle the litigation for about $10 billion. And you can see here on the slide, 3 trials to date. Bayer, Monsanto lost all 3 trials. The jurors found that Monsanto acted with malice in failing to warn consumers about the risks of its herbicides. And these are a couple quotes from judges who've overseen some of the Roundup trial litigation here. You can see Vince Chabria, he's a federal judge, fair amount of evidence. The only thing Monsanto cared about was undermining the people who were raising concerns about whether Roundup caused cancer. Another judge, Winifred Smith, Monsanto made an ongoing effort to impede, discourage, or distort scientific inquiry about the resulting science. And again, Monsanto is the poster child here. They are by no means unique. They may be the most aggressive and the most polished at these deceptive practices, but this is something that we've seen from other chemical companies, to protect their products. The litigation resulted in the release of, or the turning over by Monsanto of about 10 million pages of internal documents to the lawyers involved in the litigation. Some of that has been made public. By no means the majority of it. It still remains secret, that trove of documents, but several thousand pages have come out. And what we see here in these revelations are ghostwritten research papers. I'll talk about that in a minute. Alternative assessments provided for studies that indicate harm, and networks of scientists in the US and Europe and all around that push the safety of glyphosate. They message that very intensely to try to discredit and harass and counter critics or people like Dr. Porter or people like myself who are trying to point to data and facts. This is I'm going to share a few emails. I think I've got a little bit of time left. Share a few emails here. This was before IARC even met. These are internal Monsanto emails that came to light in the litigation. And you can see that Monsanto was talking, this is in 2014, before IARC met in 2015. And Monsanto is saying, what we have long been concerned about has happened. Glyphosate is on for IARC review. We have vulnerability in the area of epidemiology, exposure, genotox, mode of action. And then you see Monsanto predicting internally they're probably going to get a probable human carcinogen rating or a possible human carcinogen rating. They knew the science. They knew that when IARC looked at that, what they were going to find. And so what they decided to do again, before IARC even met, was to develop a plan to discredit these international cancer scientists. And they called it Orchestrate Outcry with IARC decision. And again, this is even before IARC met, which I just found fascinating. One of the things that they decided to do was to put together some papers, some scientific research papers that would counter the decision they knew IARC would come to. And this is from an internal email where they talk about ghostwriting these papers and working to bring independent scientists in, but Monsanto would do the writing and these independent scientists would just edit and sign their names, so to speak. And this really interesting little note here in this email, this is from David Saltmaris, and he says, this is Bill Hydens, and he says, recall, that is how we handled Williams, Crows, and Monroe in 2000. And William, Crows, and Monroe, for those of us, Roundup geeks, we know that study pretty well. This was, sort of foundational research and a paper that regulators around the world have pointed to and relied on to basically keep glyphosate on the market with very few restrictions at all. This paper found Roundup does not pose a health risk to humans, no effects on fertility, concluded glyphosate is non-carcinogenic. And yet in that email from Monsanto, we saw they considered that they ghost wrote this paper. So those are some interesting. Here we see them talking about these new papers that they wanted to ghost write. You see Bill Hydens talking about, I've already written a draft introduction chapter. I'm going to go back. I'm going to refresh all of this work he was doing. Yet when this paper came out in Critical Reviews in Toxicology, and you note that it was dubbed as being done by 4 independent expert panels, and it said neither any Monsanto company employee nor any attorney reviewed any of the expert panel's manuscripts. And yet from Monsanto's internal emails, we know that they were very heavily involved in doing all the work. More evidence of ghostwriting. This is from an internal email from David Saltmaris, another Monsanto scientist, talking about another paper he ghostwrote. We have Monsanto scientist John Vicini talking about ghostwriting a paper on GMOs, on the crops themselves. but he's running into trouble because he can't find anybody, any independent faculty member or academic who will put their names on something they did not produce, and not just want to take something they did not produce and slap their names on it. So there's so many of those things, and it didn't just end at research papers, published peer-reviewed research papers. We see also that op-eds, opinion pieces that we see in newspapers like USA Today or Washington Post, that these were designed and orchestrated by Monsanto as well through a consulting company in Washington, D.C. And the idea was to keep these, you see here, we know these items in the media need to be from those outside the industry. Someone
Carey,
orchestrating this. Am I out of time?
You're out of time. Thank you.
Okay. A lot more to share later. Let me get rid of this. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. John Wesley Boyd Jr., who is president of the National Black Farmers Association. And his association filed a federal lawsuit seeking to force Bayer Monsanto to either stop selling its widely used weed killer Roundup or roll out new product warnings. The lawsuit says Black farmers developed cancer after Monsanto convinced them that it was safe. Can't hear you. You're still muted. Okay, Dr. Boyd, why don't you work on that, and we'll go to the next speaker and then come back to you. So next speaker is Elizabeth Fattah, who's on the Conservation Committee of the San Diego Sierra Club. And she works with the Non-Toxic Neighborhoods, which is currently seeking legislation to restrict the use of herbicides in San Diego, California. Elizabeth.
Oh, hi, yes. I'm sorry I have been wearing a mask, but I'm in a situation where there are other people, so I hope you can hear me and bear with me. I would first like to thank everyone who organized this. This is fantastic. Was really good to it. And I want to start with my, here, is this what I have my daughter here helping me with the technology. So with me on this, I'm trying to get my slides. So with the non-toxic neighborhoods and also with the local Sierra Club, the Conservation Committee, and we have been working together on these issues. And I'm just going to briefly show you some slides here. Not working, just a minute. Oh, I have to do there, okay. And and this one of really the biggest wins for us was the city of San Diego, in which they have stopped using glyphosate in all of their parks. And actually, I learned they have 400 parks. So everything stopped. They have some pilot projects now on 3 parks to see what is working, because our approach has been working with the soil. And as you know, in Southern California, we're in a drought situation. So you can't have, well, you can, in fact, they do have plants that are probably good in New England. And that becomes a problem. And so one of the points that we're trying to make is trying to change the landscape so that you do not need to be putting anything on it. In fact, they've shown that many times. If you have the right plant, the right soil, everything works out well. So, how did we get here to get these 400 parks? And it has been many people. I mean, people writing on Facebook, on change.org, writing letters to the editor. In fact, one of the people that we had as our advisor unfortunately passed away, Dr. Schubert from the Salk Institute. And he actually wrote an op-ed piece for the San Diego Tribune. And so all this combination of people, and also, as Carey mentioned, the lawsuits, I think the lawsuits definitely had an impact on people, because immediately city officials and others, for example, I'm in a homeowners association situation. The minute you bring up you're going to be sued, they don't care that it's poisonous or anything else, but money. If you're going to be sued, they're concerned. Now, when we work with the city, again, I would stop a minute, because in a city, like, you have the parks, you have the schools, and of course you have the county. And within the county, you have some other factors. So there isn't one person or one organization within the municipality that you can go to and bang, it's all done. It doesn't work that way. So you have to go to organization within the county and the city, or within the schools, and really talk to them, get people involved. And this is what we did. And I'll just show you the next thing here. Technology, just a minute. Okay, oh, I'm going the wrong way. All right. So this is just some pictures that we had taken when we went to the city. And these are all the people that work for, not work in the sense of a salary, but volunteered with non-toxic neighborhoods. And if you see in this picture, these are the people that actually work in San Diego, work on the park and recs organization there. And so we all got together and we took the pictures. We were up there several times. This is a process, but if you think about it, we started in 2018, and now we have accomplished that, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Now, in this part of the bottom part, these are the supervisors, county supervisors. So again, see, this is another group that you have to talk to, convince, etc. And pleasantly and surprisingly, they did listen to us. And they had a proposal that one Democrat and one Republican put up. So this was nonpartisan, and this is our approach. So whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a Green, an Independent, whatever, we work together and don't get into politics, because what happens to that is that people take sides. And here there's only one side, which is the and herbicides. That's the side. So anyway, we did go to the county, And again, we actually went to their meetings, which you can do. We spoke. Now, one interesting point I want to make is that when this came up, the proposal from these two supervisors, we were told there was going to be lots of people there disagreeing. There was going to be people from Bayer, people from the Plant Society, but there was no one. We went there, we said what we wanted to say, but there was no one there who disagreed, and it passed. However, what happened then is that this was a kind of provisional pass, and 120 days, that was in February. Recently, they came back and they decided, well, maybe we shouldn't be, there's a little radical. So what we're going to do is have pilot projects. Now, we said, well, the city has pilots. They're in the park, so you don't really need more pilots. But actually, that's what they wanted to do. And because of the pandemic, of course, we couldn't go to the supervisor meeting. We had to phone in. So you don't see anyone. You have a line waiting on the phone to talk, to speak. So we, the not toxic neighborhood people, spoke. Then it was time for the opposition, and that's when the opposition came in. And it was really fascinating to me. First of all, you had someone actually representing Bayer, which I thought, really, they must really be worried to have someone who actually said they're from Bayer. But what is really more surprising to me was they had several women, and this was their approach, women who were scientists and had children. And their approach, it would almost seem like a Saturday Night Live skit because it was so unbelievable. One woman said, we have to use glyphosate because there are these weeds that people will eat and they will get ill. This is exactly what she said. And I'm thinking, are people running around the neighborhood picking up weeds and eating them? I mean, how absurd is this? And then the other woman, who I believe was a physician, believe it or not, and couldn't say more wonderful things about glyphosate. She went on, and at one point, I said to my colleagues, I was waiting for her to say, I put it on my children's cereal, because that was the impression she was giving. It was unbelievable. Anyway, they did pass it, that they're doing the pilot project for 15 months, but they're still with us. We are going to, they have other monitors, and we'll be monitoring the monitors. So I'm very hopeful about this, because what I think happens is that once something like the city does it, that there is a kind of snowball effect. Now, one thing that no one talks about or thinks about is places like where there's HOAs and also people who rent apartments in these large complexes. There's a lot of times that there's a lot of grass where there shouldn't be in Southern California, but this is something that I think that we should tackle next. The HOAs, and I've been told by people that it's easier to get something through the city than it is through an HOA. An HOA means homeowners association. I have tried myself, and I have been fortunate that they are no longer using glass in my HOA. Of course, the first thing they said was, well, we won't spray where you are. So they're going to spray everywhere else except where I live. And of course, how absurd is that? But now I think they have slowly seen the light, and they're no longer spraying glyphosate or any herbicide. So anyway, this is basically what Non-Toxic San Diego has been doing. The Sierra Club, I want to mention them because they have had a intern from the University of California, San Diego, doing a study on what they are spraying in schools. And that's a real eye opener, let me tell you. They will be certainly publishing that soon. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'll just go through here. It just,
Elizabeth,
yeah.
we're at 10 minutes for you. So,
Oh, is it? Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And have we got sound for John Boyd?
I believe we do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Just to briefly
Okay.
introduce you again, you're president of the National Black Farmers Association, and you guys sued Monsanto and Bayer about Roundup. So go ahead.
Yes, we did. Well, thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk for a few minutes. And I would like to recognize Dr. Porter, who really gave all of the science, and my good friend Carey Gillam, who oftentimes wrote about some of the protests that the National Black Farmers Association were doing during the time of the Delta Pine merger with Monsanto. So we have a very long history of speaking out against these very harmful chemicals. And we really began these type of protest type advocacy work probably 20 years ago. And I can't talk about glyphosate without talking about the effects of the conventional seed and a lack of today of the conventional seed. And the conventional seed simply is God's seed that's spoken about and written about in the Bible, and that people like George Washington Carver specialized in. Monsanto came along and said, this is no longer a conventional seed. Now we have a GMO product that now we own the seed. And this is a company that actually has been suing its own customers, the farmers, the very people that made them filthy rich. And when I first started farming in 1983 to be exact, a bag of soybean seeds was between $7 and $8 for a 50-pound bag of seed. Today, that same 50-pound bag of seed is roughly $60. That's sold by Bayer and Monsanto and a few other companies. And they say that we're paying for all of their research in this particular trait. And one doesn't go without the other. So now farmers don't have any opportunity to purchase a conventional seed. If I wanted to go downtown to my local seed dealer, there's no conventional seed readily available for farmers like myself that I would much rather have, such as my daddy farmed with a conventional seed, my grandfather farmed with a conventional seed, and here I am in the year 2020, not able to plant a conventional seed. And then farmers pretty much were forced to use this harsh chemical that we didn't know anything about in the 80s, glyphosate. And we've been using these chemicals for many years. Back then, Monsanto didn't do any outreach and technical assistance, especially with Black farmers. We invited them every year to our annual conference. These companies wouldn't come out and show us how to use these products. They'd say, hey, you need to use gloves, you need to do long sleeve shirt and a mask or anything like that. And here we are now coming down with very bad form of cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that has been rolled out in court. And we finally were able to luckily find a legal team that would file suit against this company. I believe today that these companies were really sincere about the health of farmers and others that use these harsh chemicals. They would use some of the money, but all these billions of dollars that they made off farmers like myself, and use some of that for research where they could come up with a softer, more friendly type of product that farmers could use. And today, now, the actual glyphosate doesn't do what it was supposed to do 20 years ago. Now, they came together with Bayer, the other chemical superpower, and now you have to add other additives to the glyphosate to do what Roundup was doing 20 years ago, because now these weeds have built up a tolerance, a resistance. That's what farmers are faced with, and they put this settlement out there, and we as farmers know, and others who use this product know that there's a great chance that a lot more people will come down, as Carey Gillam explained, with this ugly cancer that is taking out a lot of people, and they want to come out on the cheap end. I would like to see testing for as a part of the proposed settlement for every farmer that used glyphosate. And if you raise corn, wheat, and soybeans, you've used these products. Whether you're black, white, a small grain farmer, or a large Midwestern farmer who's raising thousands of acres, you've used these very, very harsh chemicals. And the companies have to be held accountable for this. I believe that they've known a long time ago that this product causes a very harmful type of cancer. And think about what it does to the human body and food consumption. Right now, if it was broad daylight, I could show you my fields that do have some pigweed, and I refuse to add all of these other harsh chemicals to my crops because I don't believe that they're safe for human consumption. There hasn't been enough research on it. They actually came to court and said, well, we haven't even done the research to see what effects it has on human consumption. So here you are making this product, and it's banned in other parts of the world where it's not sold there, but they want to sell it here in the United States, hand over fist with no recourse. And myself and others have been out pounding the pavement for Congress to do more about these very, very, very harsh chemicals with no avail. I would like to see labeling. There's an issue that I worked on that, quite frankly, Monsanto beat us on the hill because they have staying power to pay all of these high-priced lobbyists and things of this nature. They have staying power, and we can fly farmers in maybe once or twice during that cycle to show. But you have a right to know, as consumers here in this country, if an apple contained a GMO trait or whatever, that box of cornflakes contains corn that has been traced with glyphosate, you have a right to know, and you should be able to read it on that box or on that item. And then if you don't want to put it in your shopping basket, you don't have to. But the choice should be the American people and not the companies. So we have a host of issues here that all compile together, lead to the source. And the source, I believe, is Monsanto Bayer. And really, people, what they did here is they changed the name, but they didn't change the way that they do business. And that's the major problem here. They allow these companies to come together. They bought out every seed company from the East Coast out to the Midwest. As I mentioned, the Delta Pine merger, the cottonseed company. They went around and bought all of these seed companies, and they took away the choice. They took away my freedom as a farmer. And they said, now it's no longer the farmer's seed, it's my seed. So again, I'm just looking forward to hopefully, I hope that there'll be some questions about our lawsuit that we hope will move forward in court. And I led some farmers there and filed right in front of St. Louis and had the press conference and things of that nature. And you can't sell Roundup in Germany, but you can sell it here in the United States. People, something is terribly wrong with that. We're supposed to be the leader and showing the world how things are done correctly. And here we are having Monsanto sell these very harmful chemicals. I would like to see farmers come back out with a 4-row plow and a conventional seed. The farmers should have that choice to farm that way again. I didn't have any problem with it before 1983. I wouldn't have any problem with it now. So they've taken away the freedom to farm, they take away our chores, they didn't give us outreach and technical assistance. And these companies continue to dump on small scale farmers and continue to dump on Black farmers with no oversight. And hopefully the courts will take a look at what we filed in court and give us our day, and hopefully we'll have some vindication there. So I'm gonna stop right there and give my time to the next speaker. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Howard Ehrman, who's a MD doctor. He's been a community and union organizer since 1961. He learned of the dangers of pesticides and herbicides as a student for Dr. Barry Commoner, and was the health co-coordinator of the original Rainbow Coalition in Chicago. He's an organizer, was an organizer of the first Venceremos Brigade to Cuba in 1969, and of the first US medical student visit to the People's Republic of China in 1972. He's a co-founder of Me Valida Neighbors and the People's Response Network.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Really appreciate the invitation to speak, and it's an honor to follow Dr. Boyd. We met sometime, I don't know when, but I always have a really important spot in my heart for farmers. I grew up on my grandfather's 52-acre farm west of Chicago. So I think we're all in this to create pesticide-free zones all over the world. And I think we all also know that 90% or more of all herbicides are used in capitalist industrial agriculture, where, as John just astutely pointed out, people, for the most part, have no choice. Well, we have to start making our own choices. 1/3 of all the vegetables consumed in the United States by the end of World War II were done in victory gardens. These were not just in cities. This is a picture of New York City, but it was also in rural areas. We need to use existing land that we own either individually or cooperatively, or we need to take over land and start to do our own farming. We have to grow food everywhere. This includes schools. It includes places like parkways. I'm sure some people know who Ron Finley is from Los Angeles, who was really the first person in a big city over 15 years ago to start growing food in city parkways, which Los Angeles originally declared was illegal. And now it's legal and lots of people are doing it. To do this, we have to take on the allies of Monsanto, and that includes all the major capitalist corporations that have taken over the food supplies to our children, and in my case, my grandchildren, who are fed poisonous, toxic food with lots of fat and sugar. And these three primary companies that control 90% of all public school food and colleges, public colleges and universities, are Aramark, Chartwell, and Sodexo, who actually write into their contracts quite often that it's illegal and prohibited to take food, even if they have a school garden, and to eat it inside the school. One of the examples we need to learn from that unfortunately is still not going, but it did for 12 years, is the famous South Central Farm in Los Angeles, where over 100 families each farmed a parcel, some in common, but most individually, grew lots of food, cooked food, and shared the kind of things that John talked about, including seeds. The question of farmer to farmer seed exchanges, farmer to farmer seed banks, and being seed defenders is something that we all need to figure out how to do as soon as possible, whether we live in rural or urban areas. In terms of the urban life, we need to replace a lot of lawns. We need to grow food on the lawns. We need to grow pollinator plants in order to bring back and to save those pollinators that are still alive. In order to do this, we first have to recognize who's most at risk for the kind of cancers that the previous guests have described. And there's no doubt that small farmers and farm workers, we have lots of studies, are by far and away at greatest risk. These are the Immokalee workers. I know John knows who they are, probably has worked with them. We need to do this all over the United States. Small farmers are at tremendous risk, as John just talked about. We know that the risk of farmers being sued by Monsanto. This is well documented in several films as well as articles to stop them from using their own seeds or seeds that are shared, like my grandfather did and indigenous people did long before Europeans. As we've got to fight back against that cooperatively. Where does all this come from? Well, it comes from 5 miles from where I'm sitting. The place that controls about 85% of all capitalist agriculture, including now the People's Republic of China, is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange that controls the markets of everything you see and much more than this. This is directly related to the situation we have with land-grant colleges and universities that first started in 1862. Most of these are public universities, but not all of them. Some of them are tribal colleges, and a few of them, like Cornell or other places, are basically private. What does this have to do with what we're talking about? Well, it has a lot to do with what we're talking about, because the land-grant colleges and universities had 4 functions: agriculture, military science, engineering, and science in general. This was the basis for extension services, which we have all over the world that started in the United States. These extension services directly work with the USDA to do things like basically steal land from indigenous people, steal land from African American and Latino farmers, and basically give people the wrong advice. There are very honest, hardworking individuals in extension services throughout the country, but the extension services themselves are directly tied into the land-grant university that is directly tied in to capitalist agriculture since the end of the 19th century. There are alternatives like the Soul Fire Farm and other farms, particularly of young people of color, that are developing throughout the country, and we need to build solidarity with them. There are 2 models in the world. There's agribusiness, which is a dominant model, and there's the true sense of agroecology, where we use nature to help nature. Now, agroecology, like every other good term, has been somewhat bastardized in the last 5 years and sanitized, and there's been an attempt to divide it from food sovereignty, which is not the original intent of agroecology. Agroecology and food sovereignty have to be together. And of course, the famous report in 2011 from the UN rapporteur, Schulter, basically said that small farming can outproduce big farming. This is one of the greatest myths, of course, in the world, that most people in the United States believe, that only through large agriculture can we basically have enough food. The leading organization, including in the United States, is La Via Campesina, with 200 million members. They're small farmers and peasants around the world. And in the US, it's represented by the US Food Sovereignty Alliance. There you have the pillars of food sovereignty, the principles that everybody has their own definition, but they're all quite similar. And the basic thing is that local people should have local control of the land and decide what food is grown, how it's grown, and what it should be done with. First and foremost, we have to use the precautionary principle, which actually, in learning about this principle when it first was developed in Germany in the 1970s, there were aspects of it before then. Most environmentalists and farmers don't know about it till today. And of course, this is the exact opposite of what the chemical industry and the rest of capitalist industrial agriculture uses. They put the burden of proof on us. And that is like, let's wait till the water's boiling and then we'll decide if we're going to get out, as opposed to no, get out before the water boils. These are the 5 principles of the precautionary principle, and the most important ones, I think, are increased public participation in decision-making. That doesn't mean going to a stacked deck where the decision's already been made and testifying in front of your supervisors for your county. It means that we actually, the public, the people actually make the decisions. And the proof has to be on the people who are proposing an activity or a chemical. Okay, just want to go over a few concepts which relate to what the scientists and other people have said today. One is biomagnification. This is about heavy metals, but it's very similar for persistent organic pollutants, including pesticides. The higher you go in the food chain, the more it's concentrated. Bioaccumulation is both by the amount of fat or adipose tissue and your age. This is something that happens to you before you are born. and certainly follows you all the way to death. And the more that you get exposed, the higher you eat in the food chain, the more fat you have, the more likely you are to have cancers and other diseases. The next is the idea of synergistic effects. This is something that the US EPA and scientists who are in collaboration and get their grants from major industry all basically try to avoid, and that is that all chemicals do not exist alone. For example, in Roundup, it's not just glyphosate. It's the other chemicals that are listed on the label that all have synergistic effect to potentiate what glyphosate does. And we have to start looking at all those chemicals together. This is just an example of hepatotoxicity. If one chemical, ethanol, has a hepatotoxicity of 2, and then another chemical has 2, like carbon tetrachloride, 2 plus 2 does not equal 4, it equals 20 or more in terms of the synergistic effect. This is too busy as a slide. Again, it's mostly for heavy metals, but it shows how all this comes together with all the many human health effects, many of which have been talked about already. Then there's the idea of POPs, persistent organic pollutants that include pesticides, and how these go into every aspect of the environment, and we breathe them, we drink them, we eat them, they go up in the sky, they come back down, and it starts all over again. The idea that we're going to solve this problem without dealing with industrial agriculture is a pipe dream, because 90% of the herbicides and the vast majority of all other pesticides are used in the industrial agricultural sector. 100,000 different chemicals have been invented since World War II, and literally only a handful of those have ever been tested alone. And there's only been 1 or 2 studies that ever did synergistic testing. What's the purpose of a pesticide, of which one pesticide is herbicides? Well, it's to kill living organisms. And the EPA itself has to admit that these kind of health effects exist, and many more than that. Total usage, we've already talked about, but it is continued to go up, and it began to skyrocket in the mid-90s with GMOs. The US, of course, is the world leader in this. And these herbicides are also used in war. If we know about Agent Orange, where to this day, the Veterans Administration refuses to give full benefits to soldiers, much less to the million Vietnamese who have cancer and have multiple birth defects that persist through generations. Understanding that it wasn't just T24D and 2,4,5-T, but it was the most toxic chemical ever invented in human history, dioxin, that continues to exist in Vietnam and in the bodies of the GIs that came home. There's lots of studies.
Ehrman, that's the time is up.
Yeah, so there's lots of studies about health effects. If people have questions, we can certainly talk about those.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to go into questions and answers, and we have several. And just to start, one question for Dr. Boyd from Angelica Muller in St. Louis is, what are the challenges for family farmers to go organic, and what public policies are needed to support that?
The challenges to grow organic, of course, is to find a direct market in your area that will support the products, and that's something we've been trying to do in the National Black Farmers Association, is have more smaller scale type agriculture type farmers that can develop those relationships in their own communities. But for conventional, for more larger scale type farmers, it's kind of hard to change over to a organic type of operation with your existing debts. So those are some of the challenges that we have. For example, if you own property or you have a mortgage on that farm, if you have equipment debt, things of that nature, you want to fertilize, all of these things, it's kind of hard to switch directly over to organic. You have to transition into it and develop a more diversified type farming operation. And that's something that we've been talking to our membership about, but it's very, very challenging to do. So those are some of the things that we're currently facing. And also a lot of people think these direct payments that this current administration touts, the president touts about, Very little of that money reach farmers of color and small scale farmers, and if it does, it's in very, very smaller amounts than what's been portrayed out there.
Okay, thank you. Next question is open to anybody that wants to respond. So I guess in the chat, just raise your hand. And I think we have 2 minutes limit on answers, so we can get through these. So the question is, how does one detoxify one's body, land, and living environment from herbicides? What's the best way to clean fruits and vegetables? What methods of pest control are there without pesticides? And how do we determine if products have herbicides? So.
Well, there are a lot of possible, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. First, one of the greatest ways to do it is to find an organization like Moses in the Midwest that's organic farmers, talking to organic farmers. Every February in La Crosse, Wisconsin, they all meet and they share common problems and solutions. And there are a lot of them. There's not a crop in this country or in the world that we can't grow without pesticides and is grown without pesticides. Finding out what is on your crops is a real expensive proposition, unfortunately, because most of the testing procedures are expensive. Glyphosate is an exception in that there's one that works really pretty well, and there are several outfits that can do it, and they can do it really pretty cheaply, but you're better off just trying to find organic foods if you possibly can, especially local people. And it's true, we need a lot more development of local markets for organic food. But one of the things is the demand is growing like crazy because people are getting sick from these poisons. And market share ultimately is going to be the thing that changes it. And we need to get a government in place and congressional people in place who support organic agriculture. That is not happening right now.
Elizabeth.
And also,
Elizabeth.
Yes, okay, thank you. One thing about growing organic and what we can do about it is in the Congress, there are many bills coming up about farming, and talk to your representative and say that you want the U.S. agriculture, the government to support organic farming and not give money to these large farming corporations. I think that that's the way to go. In fact, there are, I don't remember now, but I always get emails from different environmental groups saying, please sign this petition to tell your representative to support organic farming. I think that's one way to go. Also, actually, organic food the price has really come down. And sometimes when you go to the supermarket and you look at the price of conventional food, I'm thinking of mainly vegetables, there's very little difference in price, very little difference. But again, there's been a campaign, I don't know whether Monsanto has started it, but to say that there's no really health difference between conventional pesticide-laden vegetables or organics. So, you know, that's another problem. But I would try to go that way by getting your representative in Congress to support giving money or giving, money definitely to organic farmers.
Okay, anybody want to add to that answer or move on to the next question?
Yeah, I do. Basically, I want to first say that the whole process for small farmers, whether they be people of color or white, to get certified for being organic is way too expensive and way too cumbersome. It's got to be made free, and it's got to be a lot less cumbersome. We should force the extension services of the land-grant universities to provide assistance to small farmers to do this, because until that happens, we're going to have huge big development, which we already have in milk and other areas like Horizon Milk, of massive industrial organic farming, which I don't trust whatsoever, and is not helping small farmers. In fact, there was a study done in California where actually organic farming in California 15 years ago, it may have changed, treated farm workers worse than conventional farms. In terms of eating healthy, the group that's done the most independent tests are the Environmental Working Group. You can go to their website. They also have apps to see which foods really you should try to get that are organic, and which foods maybe aren't as important, because the cost of organic vegetables outside of places like California and Florida are still quite a bit higher and are not available, frankly, in most neighborhoods of color.
Okay, I got a question here for Carey Gillam from Daniel Romano in St. Louis. And he wanted you to update the Roundup lawsuits against Bayer Monsanto. I think you were doing that at the end of your talk, but I think he wants more information.
Sure. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so where we are, Bayer has been trying to settle the litigation. The trials have all been put on hold, both because of COVID. COVID really gave an advantage to Bayer. There were several trials scheduled for 2020. And when the courthouses all closed down, the leverage for another trial went away. So Bayer has negotiated a settlement for around $10 billion with a good chunk of the plaintiffs. There are more than 100,000 that have claims, we're told, and they've settled with most of the major law firms to take, to settle maybe 60, 70, 75% of those claims is what they're looking at. They haven't settled all. There's still a lot of smaller law firms with 400, 500, 600 clients that have not settled and are pushing for more trials at the end of this year, early in 2021. Bayer's main sort of hurdle right now is trying to figure out not only how to settle the current litigation, the current lawsuits against it here in the United States, but also how to head off lawsuits in the future. Because people who are now using it and will be developing non-Hodgkin lymphoma now or in the future, could still sue Bayer, and they need a way to take care of that and mitigate against that risk. One thing that I'm hearing from one of the law firms is that they might be very close to getting Bayer to putting a warning label on its glyphosate-based products, its Roundup and other glyphosate herbicides, which would go a long way toward limiting the ability of people to sue in the future if they're using it. So, that's where it is right now. Bayer's, stock has taken another tumble. The investors are really not happy. Barron's just last week, I think, wrote that Monsanto was the worst corporate deal in history. Bayer buying Monsanto for $63 billion. So that's where we are.
Okay. Question from Mitchell Cohen in New York City to Dr. Porter. He said they say it was Zika that caused microcephaly. And you're saying it's Roundup. Could you discuss that some more?
Yeah, I know I've heard that before. That was the claim from industry. They're trying to find a way out of the problem, but almost certainly Roundup has been involved in a lot of birth defects and other things in Argentina. As I pointed out, one of the things that Roundup does is stimulate the retinoic acid pathway, which promotes synthesis of vitamin A, and that has been directly, any pediatrician will tell you that you really do not want a mom to get too much vitamin A because they get this. There hasn't been a lot of science behind it. It was just simply claims, but the science that out there we have now is indicating that it's absolutely possible and likely that Roundup is involved. The doctors down there have been going nuts because of this, and it's not Zika. There have been several studies that have ruled out Zika as a causative agent for these microcephaly kids.
Okay. I have another question for Dr. Boyd,
Yes, sir.
who wants to know more about the lawsuit against Monsanto, and also a second question, what's a good source of organic seed?
The first question is Attorney Ben Crump filed the complaint for us in St. Louis, along with some of his partners, and it addresses some of the things that my good friend Carey Gillam just spoke about, where the actual cases for, in this case, for African American farmers who would be pretty much shut out because it hasn't been determined yet whether they've been tested. So we would like to see testing for farmers. That's the first thing, to see if they have this non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and also that they would not be shut out of future compensation, because if things go the way they're heading in court, a lot of farmers will not be able to take part in that actual settlement. So the complaint addresses those things, and if farmers would like to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to provide our contact information so that they could reach out to the National Black Farmers Association directly. And the issue of the seeds, I would say True Leaf, organic seeds for small scale operations, and other seed banks is a good source to get organic seeds. And here again, these companies like Monsanto really have been devastating for the future of agriculture in this country. And I touched on it in my presentation about the actual, they took away the farmer's choice, and it took away the farmer's freedom to farm by having only their seeds up front, as far as for the three major commodities: corn, wheat, and soybeans, and the others. So I would like to stop right there.
Okay. I have a couple questions for Elizabeth Fattah. What are you telling your city about alternatives to spraying herbicides, and have you used the Freedom of Information Act to get more information in San Diego?
Yeah, well, right now everything is on a pilot, and they keep and we're talking about the city park. They are on a pilot, and of course they're not using anything. And the other parks keep coming up and saying to us, "Oh, can we use this?" And we're saying, "No, you can't use that." But one thing I didn't have time to talk about, and that was that you have to test the soil. It's very important, because years and years of pesticide use has really depleted the soil. And one important thing is to nutrient to the soil. And this is what we're stressing, rather than going out and trying to find something. And there are some, for example, the vinegar, the stronger agricultural vinegar can be used. But basically, what it is that your soil is sick. And what you have to do is try to reclaim it by putting in nutrients. And that has been our procedure.
I'd like to add a little bit to that too. The city of Irvine has completely gotten rid of pesticides in their parks, and that was due to Chip Osborne at Beyond Pesticides. And so if you'd like some really good expert help in that area, you should contact him at Beyond Pesticides, because he's done a fantastic job, and I've seen him do it all over the country. He can grow organic lawns anywhere, and he does it. He's been doing it for the National Park Service and all kinds of urban areas.
Right. Well, we're trying to get rid of lawns in San Diego, if possible.
Yeah.
Some of the lawns, I'll tell you that.
I understand that.
Well, here's a question that one of you, I'm not sure there's an answer to it, but they want to know, they have a very old can of Roundup and want to know how to safely dispose of it.
Oh. I don't know.
You need a technical expert for that. I'm sure there are people who do it. I don't know whether the web would be a place to go to look for that, but that would be my first choice.
Maybe the first choice is to not make it in the first place, but
Right.
good luck finding an answer for that. Another question is, where do you get good organic fertilizer for houseplant tomatoes? So you're, I guess, avoiding the herbicides.
Where do you get good organic?
Fertilizer for houseplant tomatoes.
Yeah, man, I can find it in my local nurseries here in Madison. I don't know where this person lives. If there must be some organic farmers in your area, and one of the things I do is I find some organic farmers and just go out and buy some of their organic manure. It's always
So just in
compost.
terms of course, we'd want people to kind of make their own fertilizer compost, but if they can't, I found the best organic one that's available in most places in the country is called Purple Cow, which is actually developed in Wisconsin and sold out of Wisconsin. So
Yeah.
Purple Cow, 2 words, just like it sounds.
And this is John. There is also eggshells, banana peelings, coffee grind. These are some all kind of organic type of alternatives as well.
There's something else too, and that is leaves in the fall. I've made some fantastic soil that's really, really rich. And actually, the interesting thing about this is that what you really need to build up in your soil is the organic matter in the soil. If you can get your carbon content up to about 12%, you're going to have some wonderful stuff, because what you're doing is you're developing the soil microorganisms, and they need that organic carbon to feed on. And then they pull all kinds of nutrients out of the rocks and everything else that's there by just simply breaking them down and making nutrients available. So feed your lawn carbon, any kind of carbon, paper, wood, chips, whatever.
Compost, an opportunity to do that too, composting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, another question is, how can small cities have their own farmers markets?
They just have to organize.
Yeah, I've seen in smaller cities a lot of farmers markets. I think they're rapidly spreading. People like to go and produce and talk to the farmers. So
That's right.
I think there are probably plenty of models, if you need in your city to figure out how to do it. There's people that can help you.
Yeah. Beyond Pesticides could do that because they're into that big time.
Okay. I see an announcement from Joel Kupferman, who's a environmentalist in New York with the Environmental Justice Initiative. And he said they're working with public employees for environmental responsibility to get government workers whistleblower protection. And I think, he's speaking particularly in the environmental field. Given the federal government we got right now, environmentalists are the enemy.
Yep.
Here's a question. Can anyone on the panel describe the relationship between GMO crops and CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations?
Well, I think we all know that basically one of the reasons that GMO corn and soybeans, which are raised primarily in the Midwest but not exclusively, were developed was to really expand CAFOs, not just in the United States, but in China and other places. So that's, kind of one of the direct relationships.
Here.
Can you
I
hear me?
think here again.
Go ahead, Carey.
Oh, yeah. No, I was
Go
just saying, the first thing that I think about is, so a lot of these concentrated animal feeding operations a lot of the livestock and the animals are being fed food that is grown with pesticides, genetically modified foods that are sprayed directly with glyphosate, and now including, and in the future going to be with dicamba and 2,4-D and things like that. So you have these animals, and actually the government regulators understand that pesticide residues are going to transfer to the meat and the product of these animals, and they have residue tolerances set. You also have then pesticide residues coming out of the manure, the excrement of these animals, and that contaminates the environment, the waterways. It also has been found to be a contaminant of fertilizer used in organic production. So we are having glyphosate residues in fertilizer that is being spread over organic fields.
Wow. Next question is, how is climate change affecting herbicide use?
Well, climate change is accelerating herbicide use along with the promotion of GMOs all over the world. Part of this is to develop very specific contractual relationships with public and private universities, particularly in the global south, sub-Saharan Africa and other places, where climate change and lack of resources are really hurting small farmers. So they get people who are professors and outreach workers from extension services to then promote GMO seeds. They have to use more pesticides, and the vicious circle and cycle begins. And as John described, they basically do everything they can to confiscate the local seeds that have been around for millennia.
Dr. Boyd, I think you had something to say on the GMO and CAFO question.
Yes, I was saying that a lot of these those concentrated feed cattle operations and things of that nature, and hog operations, they're feeding the cheapest feed, which is a number 3 grade type corn, and it contains just like Harry said, the GMO Roundup that's sprayed on this stuff. We need more organic type of farmers. I raise grass-fed cow-calf operations, which I don't feed them these type of feeds, and I produce my own hay. And if we really want to get away from the GMO type thing, we need people, average everyday people, to start growing in their backyards in these rural areas and start small. And they know what they put on them, and they know what they grow. So I'm encouraging more and more people. You don't have to classify yourself as a farmer that grows some healthy foods in your backyard. We have to start somewhere. Is what the message should be.
Good point. Good point.
Okay, we have a question for Carey Gillam. Can you please lay out how pesticides and GMOs are not only awful here in the U.S., but are used by the U.S. government as tools to take over land in other countries?
By the U.S. government to take over land? I don't know. I know I've written pretty extensively, and we have a lot of documents from inside the government that lay out how actively our U.S. government works to defend and promote the use of GMOs and glyphosate and chemicals on behalf of Monsanto and other companies, Monsanto primarily. I just wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about Thailand, for instance, which last year said it was going to ban glyphosate, chlorpyrifos, and what was the third one? I'm not going to remember now. Chlorpyrifos, glyphosate, and I forgot the third one. And Monsanto, came into the regulators and said, we've got to stop this. You've got to act on our behalf. And you can see from internal emails and memos that the U.S. government pretty much jumped right to it and went in and talked to Thailand and basically told them that they needed to not ban glyphosate or things were going to be really rough for them with other trade consequences. And here we are a year later, and they decided not to ban glyphosate. So when you see that in countries around the world, whenever they do try to rein in the use of glyphosate or other profitable chemicals for U.S.-based companies and GMOs, you see the U.S. government working not on behalf of consumers or taxpayers, but on behalf of these companies.
Well, when the U.S. government so-called won World War II, one of the first things they did working with scientists is the Green Revolution. And that was supposedly to help small farmers starting in Asia, the Philippines, India, But really what it did was destroy a lot of small farms and begin a major process of movement towards industrial agriculture in those countries and many other countries around the world. Now that's being done by USAID. It's also being done in conjunction with Nature Conservancy. So they work together to take over land, to so-called protect it for Nature Conservancy. But the first thing they do is to kick off all indigenous people and peasants out of the land.
Right. You've seen this in Africa a lot. There's been a big push in Africa. The Gates Association is involved, and there's a lot of money and a lot of very powerful influences that are seeking to control land and resources, in our food system around the world.
I've seen the Nature Conservancy push pesticides into oyster production out on the West Coast and the East Coast, especially on the West Coast. I'm very disappointed in that organization.
So we're out of questions. I think it's been a good discussion. We've gone on for an hour and a half. Seems like a good stopping point. So I want to thank all the panelists for their participation, all the sponsoring organizations that pulled this together. And if I can find it quickly, I'll read them over because it's been a while since they scrolled on the screen. I don't think I'm gonna be able to do that, but it included the Climate Council. I know the Gateway Green Alliance, I think Beyond Pesticides, National Black Farmers Association, and whatever social media helped you find this here, you'll see who the other sponsors were. So I want to thank all of them for pulling this together. And thank you for listening. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.